The Montana wind howled like a dying animal through the bare cottonwoods, as Victoria Thornton gripped the reins of her exhausted mare, her swollen belly contracting with another wave of pain that made her vision blur white at the edges. She had made a terrible miscalculation leaving the trading post when she did, believing she could reach the winter cabin her late husband had built before the baby came. But the blizzard had descended with vengeful fury, and now she was lost somewhere in the vast wilderness between Fort Benton and the Judith Basin, the snow so thick she could barely see her horse's ears twitching nervously ahead of her. It was December 1883, and Victoria had been traveling alone for 3 days since burying Thomas beside the trail 2 weeks prior, his fever finally claiming him after the infection from a simple cut had spread poison through his blood. At 23 years old, she found herself widowed, 8 months pregnant, and now caught in what the old-timers would later call the worst blizzard to hit Montana territory in a decade. The mare stumbled, and Victoria felt another contraction grip her so violently that she cried out into the screaming wind, the sound swallowed instantly by nature's fury. She needed shelter immediately. Through the wall of white, she could barely make out a dark shape that might have been a rock outcropping or perhaps fallen trees. Victoria urged her mare forward. Each step the animal took sinking deep into snow that was already knee-high and climbing. When they finally reached the dark mass, she discovered it was indeed a cluster of massive boulders that formed a crude overhang, not much but better than being completely exposed to the elements that were rapidly trying to kill her. Victoria half fell, half slid from her horse, landing hard on her knees in the snow. She managed to pull her meager supplies from the saddlebags before her mare, spooked by a particularly violent gust of wind, tore the reins from her frozen fingers and disappeared into the white chaos. Victoria screamed after the animal, but it was gone, taking with it her best chance of survival. She crawled under the rock overhang, dragging her bedroll and the small pack that contained the last of her dried meat, a canteen of water that was already starting to freeze, and the few baby clothes she had managed to sew during the long, lonely weeks of Thomas's decline. Another contraction hit stronger than before, and Victoria knew with absolute certainty that her baby was coming now, in this frozen hell, with no midwife, no fire, no warmth at all. She tried to remember everything the women back in Fort Benton had told her about childbirth, but her mind felt as frozen as her fingers. She managed to spread the bedroll beneath her and remove her heavy coat just long enough to pull up her skirts and petticoats, the cold air hitting her bare skin like knives. Then she wrapped the coat back around herself as best she could and waited for the next wave of pain. Hours passed in a blur of agony and white noise. Victoria pushed when her body demanded it, screamed into her bundled sleeve when the pain became unbearable, and prayed to a God she was not entirely sure was listening. The temperature continued to drop as darkness fell, though the difference between day and night was barely noticeable in the blizzard's fury. She could no longer feel her feet or her hands, and a terrible drowsiness kept trying to pull her under despite the pain of labor keeping her partially alert. When the baby finally came, sliding into the world on a prayer and a scream, Victoria's numb fingers fumbled to catch the tiny, slippery body. The infant was silent, terrifyingly silent, and with the last of her strength Victoria rubbed the baby's back and chest, trying to stimulate breath into those small lungs. Finally, blessedly, a weak cry emerged thin and pitiful against the roar of the storm. A boy. She had a son. Victoria managed to tie off and tear the umbilical cord using her teeth and a leather string from her pack. Then she pulled the baby inside her coat against her bare chest, knowing that skin contact, was the only warmth she could offer him. She wrapped her bedroll around them both as tightly as possible, but she could feel the cold seeping deeper into her bones with every passing minute. Blood soaked the ground beneath her, too much blood, and she knew that something was wrong, that her body was not stopping the bleeding the way it should. The baby made small, mewing sounds against her chest, and Victoria hummed tunelessly to him, telling him about his father, about the cabin that would have been his home, about the life she had hoped to give him. Her voice grew weaker as the hours crawled by. She tried to stay awake, knowing that sleep in these conditions meant death, but her body had been through too much. The cold, the blood loss, the sheer exhaustion of labor with no food or warmth, it was all too much. She must have lost consciousness because the next thing Victoria knew, she was dreaming of warmth, of a deep voice speaking words she could not quite understand, of strong arms lifting her. It felt so real that she tried to open her eyes, but her lids were too heavy. The baby was still against her chest. She could feel his small body there, but was he moving? She could not tell anymore. Nathaniel Vance had been tracking a wounded elk for 2 days when the blizzard hit, and he knew better than to try to push through it. He had found a small cave about 5 miles from his winter trap line, and had settled in to wait out the storm with a good fire and plenty of dried venison. He was a solitary man by nature, had been working as a cowboy, trapper, and occasional scout since he was 16. And at 27 he preferred the company of the wilderness to most people he had met. He had seen his share of hardship in Montana Territory, had survived 2 previous brutal winters, and knew how to read the land and sky. But something kept nagging at him as the storm raged into its second day. A feeling, an instinct, the kind that had saved his life more than once. He tried to ignore it, but by the afternoon of that second day, he could not shake the certainty that he needed to move, needed to check his trap line even though it made no logical sense to venture out in these conditions. Nathaniel had learned long ago to trust his instincts, so he bundled up, secured his supplies, and pushed out into the blizzard with a rope tied around his waist and anchored to a tree near his cave so he could find his way back. He moved slowly, methodically checking each trap location, finding them all buried under feet of snow. He was about to turn back when he spotted something that was not quite right, a shape near the boulder outcropping that was too regular to be natural. Nathaniel approached carefully, and his heart nearly stopped when he realized what he was seeing. A woman lay curled beneath the rocks, wrapped in a bedroll that was stiff with ice and blood. She was gray-pale, her lips blue, and for a terrible moment Nathaniel thought he was looking at a corpse. Then he saw the slight rise and fall of her chest, saw her eyelids flutter, and he dropped to his knees beside her. "Madam, madam, can you hear me?" His voice was hoarse from disuse. He rarely spoke aloud when alone. There was no response. He reached out to check for a pulse at her throat and felt the faint, thready beat beneath his gloved fingers. She was alive, but barely. As he started to carefully unwrap the bedroll to assess her condition, he heard it. A tiny, weak sound from inside her coat, a baby's cry. Nathaniel's hands, steady and sure when setting traps or skinning game, shook as he carefully opened the woman's coat. Inside, pressed against her bare skin, was an infant, a newborn by the looks of it, the umbilical cord still attached but tied off. The baby was alive, moving weakly, but suffering from the cold just like its mother. Nathaniel made a decision in that instant. He could not move them both separately in this storm, and they would both die if he did not get them warm immediately. He quickly removed his heavy fur-lined coat and wrapped it around the woman, baby still inside her shirt. Then he lifted them both, surprised at how light she was, and began the treacherous journey back to his cave, following his rope guide through the whiteout conditions. The trip that had taken him 30 minutes to walk out took nearly an hour to return, his burden precious and fragile in his arms. He could feel the woman's shallow breathing against his chest, could hear the baby's weak cries, and he pushed himself harder than he ever had. When he finally stumbled into his cave, the fire had burned down to coals, but it was still gloriously warm compared to the outside air. Nathaniel laid the woman down as gently as possible near the fire and immediately set about building it back up. Once flames were leaping high, he turned his attention to his unexpected guests. The baby needed to be warmed first. The tiny body was dangerously cold. Nathaniel had no experience with infants, had barely been around children in his adult life, but he knew about hypothermia and he knew about survival. He carefully extracted the baby from the woman's coat and shirt, noting that it was a boy, and wrapped him in the warmest, driest blanket he had. Then, feeling awkward but knowing it was necessary, he opened his own shirt and placed the baby against his bare chest, wrapping them both together. Skin-to-skin contact was the fastest way to warm someone suffering from cold exposure. The baby felt impossibly small and fragile against him, and Nathaniel found himself holding his breath, terrified he would somehow hurt this tiny creature. But after several minutes pressed against his warmth, the baby's crying grew stronger, more insistent, and Nathaniel took that as a good sign. Now for the mother. She was in worse condition than the baby, that much was clear. Nathaniel gently removed her frozen coat and dress, trying to maintain what modesty he could while also recognizing that her survival depended on getting her warm and dry immediately. There was blood, so much blood, soaked into her clothes and the bedroll. She had clearly just given birth, alone in that frozen hell, and had been bleeding for hours. Nathaniel had dressed many a wound in his years in the wilderness, had even performed some rough surgery on himself and others when necessary. He cleaned her as best he could with warm water he heated over the fire, then packed clean cloth between her legs to try to stop the bleeding. He covered her with every blanket he had, positioning her as close to the fire as he dared without risking burns. Then came the long vigil. Nathaniel sat with the baby against his chest, keeping the fire roaring, and watched the woman for any sign of improvement or decline. He checked her pulse regularly, dribbled small amounts of warm water into her mouth when he could get her to swallow reflexively, and waited. The baby began to root against his chest, seeking food that Nathaniel could not provide. He knew that newborns needed to eat soon after birth, but he had nothing suitable. The best he could do was dip a clean cloth in some water he had boiled and cooled and let the baby suck on that, providing at least some hydration. The baby took it eagerly, and Nathaniel felt a strange surge of protectiveness toward this small life that had come into the world under the worst possible circumstances. "Your mama is a fighter," he murmured to the infant, his voice soft. "She kept you alive out there in conditions that would kill grown men. She wrapped you against her heart and kept you warm with her own body even as she was dying. That is love, little one. That is what it looks like." The baby's eyes, unfocused and dark, seemed to look at him, and Nathaniel felt something shift in his chest, some wall he had built around himself years ago beginning to crack. The woman stirred sometime during the night, moaning softly. Nathaniel was at her side immediately, checking her pulse, her temperature. Her skin was warmer now, no longer the deathly gray color, and when he gently lifted one eyelid, her pupil contracted in response to the firelight. Good signs, all of them. "Madam, can you hear me? You are safe. You and your baby are safe." Her lips moved, but no sound emerged. Nathaniel brought his canteen to her mouth and carefully let a few drops of water fall onto her tongue. She swallowed, Then her eyes slowly opened, confused and unfocused. "My baby," she whispered, the words barely audible. "He is right here, alive and well. I have been keeping him warm." Nathaniel carefully shifted to show her the small bundle against his chest. "He is a strong boy, fought hard to stay with you." Tears slipped from the corners of her eyes. "I thought we would die. I thought I had killed us both by leaving the trading post when I did. You are both alive, and you are both going to stay that way if I have anything to say about it. But I need you to drink some more water, and I have some warm broth I can give you. You lost a lot of blood, and you need to rebuild your strength." Over the next few hours, Nathaniel coaxed small amounts of liquid into Victoria, learning her name and bits of her story between her periods of exhausted sleep. He learned about her husband Thomas, dead just 2 weeks, about their dream of homesteading in the Judith Basin, about how everything had fallen apart so quickly. The baby needed to eat, truly eat, and Victoria was too weak to nurse him properly. Nathaniel did the only thing he could think of. He had some canned milk in his supplies, a luxury he had purchased at the last trading post. He diluted it with warm water and fed it to the baby using a cloth, letting the infant suck the mixture from the fabric. It was far from ideal, but it was something, and the baby took it eagerly. The blizzard raged outside for 3 more days, but inside the cave there was warmth and slowly growing hope. Nathaniel tended to both mother and child with a care and gentleness that surprised him. He had always thought of himself as rough around the edges, more comfortable with horses and wilderness than with people. But something about these 2 vulnerable lives called forth a tenderness he had not known he possessed. Victoria grew stronger each day, though she remained very weak from the blood loss. She watched Nathaniel with the baby, saw how carefully he handled the tiny body, how he warmed milk and patiently fed him, how he checked the makeshift diaper Nathaniel had fashioned from torn cloth and changed it without complaint. This rough cowboy with sun-weathered skin and calloused hands moved with surprising grace when caring for her son. "You saved our lives," Victoria said on the 4th day, her voice stronger now. She was sitting up, wrapped in blankets, watching Nathaniel hold the baby by the fire. "I just happened to be checking my trap line. Right place, right time." Nathaniel did not look at her as he spoke, his attention on the baby. "No. Something brought you to us. In that storm, in the thousands of acres of wilderness you found us. That was not chance." Victoria's dark eyes were intense, filled with an emotion Nathaniel could not quite name. "You could have left us. It would have been easier, safer for you. But you carried us both through the blizzard to your shelter. You have cared for us like we are your own family." "I will never forget that, Nathaniel Vance." "Never." Nathaniel finally looked at her, and something passed between them in that moment, something neither of them could have named but both felt deep in their bones. She was beautiful, he realized, even exhausted and worn from her ordeal. Her dark hair hung in waves around her pale face, and her eyes held a strength that spoke of deep reserves of courage. "What is his name?" Nathaniel asked softly, looking back down at the baby in his arms. "I had not decided yet. Thomas and I had talked about names, but we could never agree. Thomas wanted something strong and traditional. I wanted something that meant hope." Victoria paused, then smiled softly. "What about Nathaniel? That is a name of strength and of the man who gave us both a second chance at life." Nathaniel felt his throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "That is too great an honor." "No, it is exactly right. I will call him Nathan after you, Nathan Thomas Thornton, for both the father who would have loved him and the man who saved him." The blizzard finally began to ease on the 5th day, though snow continued to fall lightly. Nathaniel ventured outside to assess the conditions and to check his food supplies. They were running low. He had not planned on feeding 3 mouths through the winter, but he had enough to last several more weeks if they were careful. The question was what to do next. Victoria was still too weak to travel, and the baby was barely a week old. The nearest settlement was Fort Benton, at least 2 days' travel in good conditions, and impossible to reach right now with the amount of snow that had fallen. His winter cabin was closer, only a day's journey if the weather held, and it was much better stocked and more comfortable than this temporary cave shelter. When he went back inside and presented the options to Victoria, she listened carefully, then nodded. "If you think we can make it to your cabin, that is what we should do. You have already given us so much, saved us from death, but I cannot ask you to sacrifice your entire winter's supplies feeding us when you have a better option available." "It is not a sacrifice," Nathaniel said, more sharply than he intended. "You and Nathan are not burdens to be endured. You are people who need help, and I am glad to provide it." Victoria smiled at his vehemence. "Then we will go to your cabin when you think it is safe to travel." They waited 3 more days for the weather to settle and for Victoria to regain more of her strength. During that time, Nathaniel constructed a crude sled from branches and rope that he could pull behind his horse when he retrieved the animal from where he had sheltered it in a nearby box canyon. He also fashioned a sling that would allow Victoria to carry Nathan against her chest while keeping her hands free to hold on during the journey. On the morning they were set to leave, Nathaniel looked at Victoria carefully. She still looked pale and thin, but there was determination in her eyes and color in her cheeks. The baby was thriving as well as could be expected on diluted canned milk, and the little breast milk Victoria was starting to produce now that she was eating regularly and recovering from the trauma. "Are you certain you are ready for this?" Nathaniel asked. "We can wait longer if you need to." "I am ready. I want Nathan to have a real roof over his head and warm walls around him. Let us go." The journey to Nathaniel's cabin took longer than anticipated. They had to stop frequently for Victoria to rest and for Nathan to be fed. The snow was deep, and even with snowshoes it was exhausting work. But Nathaniel was patient, never pushing them beyond what they could handle, always alert for signs that Victoria was overtaxing herself. When the cabin finally came into view, nestled in a small valley surrounded by pine trees, Victoria felt tears of relief sting her eyes. It was small but well built, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Smoke began rising from that chimney soon after Nathaniel got them inside and lit the fire in the large hearth. The cabin was one large room with a sleeping loft above. It was sparse but clean, with a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, a counter with a basin and pump, and shelves stocked with supplies. A large bed took up one corner, and Nathaniel immediately directed Victoria to it. "You take the bed. I will sleep in the loft or by the fire." "Nathaniel, this is your home. I cannot take your bed. You just gave birth 10 days ago and nearly died. You need rest and comfort." "The bed is yours for as long as you are here. I will hear no arguments." His tone was firm but kind, and Victoria was too tired to protest further. Over the following weeks, a rhythm developed in the cabin. Nathaniel hunted and trapped, keeping them supplied with fresh meat. Victoria cooked and cleaned as much as her recovering strength allowed, and cared for Nathan, who grew stronger and more alert each day. They talked in the evenings by the fire, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes, their losses. Nathaniel told her about growing up in Texas, the son of a cowboy who died in a stampede when Nathaniel was 15. He had worked various ranches, driven cattle, and eventually made his way north to Montana Territory, seeking a life of more independence. He had been saving money to buy his own land, to start his own ranch, but he was still a few years away from that goal. Victoria told him about her childhood in Missouri, her marriage at 20 to Thomas, a gentle man with big dreams but little practical sense. She spoke honestly about her marriage, how she had cared for Thomas, but had never felt the deep, passionate love she had read about in books. He had been a friend, a companion, and she mourned him, but she also recognized that theirs had been a partnership of convenience more than a love match. "I feel guilty saying that," she admitted one night as they sat by the fire, Nathan sleeping peacefully in a wooden cradle Nathaniel had crafted. "He was a good man, and he gave me Nathan, even if he never got to meet him." "You do not need to feel guilty for telling the truth about your own feelings," Nathaniel said quietly. "Love is not something we can force, no matter how much we might want to feel it. You honored your commitment to him, stood by him until the end, and that is what matters." As winter deepened around them, something else deepened inside the cabin. Victoria found herself watching Nathaniel when he did not know she was looking, admiring the strength in his hands as he worked, the gentleness in his eyes when he held Nathan, the quiet competence with which he handled every challenge the harsh winter threw at them. She had never felt this way about Thomas, this fluttering in her chest when Nathaniel smiled at her, this awareness of his presence in every room. Nathaniel was fighting his own battle with feelings that grew stronger every day. He had thought himself content with solitude, had believed that the wilderness was enough for him. But watching Victoria with her son, seeing her strength and grace as she recovered and bloomed in the warmth and safety of his cabin, hearing her laugh at his clumsy jokes, he realized he had been lonely without knowing it. She filled spaces in his life he had not realized were empty. He tried to keep his distance, reminding himself that she was a widow, vulnerable and dependent on him. The last thing she needed was him forcing his affections on her when she had no choice but to stay in his cabin until spring. But it was getting harder to maintain that distance when every fiber of his being wanted to close the gap between them. One evening in late January, a month after Nathan's birth, Victoria was rocking the baby by the fire when she began to sing. Her voice was soft but true, a lullaby her mother had sung to her. Nathaniel paused in his work of mending a harness to listen, and when she finished, he found himself speaking without thinking. "You have a beautiful voice." Victoria looked up, startled, color flooding her cheeks. "Thank you." "I am out of practice. I have not had much reason to sing these past difficult months. You have reason now." Nathaniel gestured to Nathan, who was gazing up at his mother with unfocused baby eyes. "He loves hearing you. What about you?" The question slipped out before Victoria could stop it, and she immediately wanted to take it back, but Nathaniel was already answering. "I love hearing you too. Your voice makes this cabin feel like a home instead of just a shelter." The air between them suddenly felt charged, full of unspoken words and unexplored feelings. Victoria's heart was pounding, and she could see Nathaniel's chest rising and falling more rapidly than normal. He took a step toward her, then stopped, clearly wrestling with himself. "Victoria, I need to say something, but I want you to know that you are under no obligation to respond in any particular way. You are safe here no matter what, and if what I am about to say makes you uncomfortable, I will never mention it again." Nathaniel's voice was rough with emotion. "Say it," Victoria whispered. "I have come to care for you. More than care, if I am being honest. These weeks with you and Nathan, they have shown me a life I never knew I wanted but now cannot imagine living without. I know the timing is terrible. I know you are newly widowed and dependent on my help. I know I have no right to speak of such things, but I cannot keep silent anymore. I am falling in love with you, Victoria. I think I have been since the moment I found you in that blizzard, and you opened your eyes and asked about your baby before yourself." Victoria felt tears spilling down her cheeks, But they were not tears of sadness or discomfort. They were tears of relief and joy. I thought I was alone in feeling this way. I thought I was betraying Thomas's memory by caring for you so much, so soon after his death. But Nathaniel, what I feel for you is unlike anything I have ever experienced. With Thomas, I cared for him, I respected him, but with you I feel alive. I feel like my heart might burst from my chest whenever you smile at me. I wake up grateful for another day in your presence. If that is love, then I am falling too, have been falling since you carried us through the storm. Nathaniel crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, then hesitated, waiting for her permission. Victoria shifted Nathan to one arm and reached up with the other, touching Nathaniel's cheek. It was all the invitation he needed. He knelt beside her chair and gently, reverently kissed her. It was a kiss of promise, of hope, of 2 lonely souls finding unexpected connection in the harshest of circumstances. When they parted, both were breathing hard, and Nathaniel rested his forehead against hers. I will build you a life, Victoria. I will give you and Nathan everything I have. I will work every day to be worthy of this gift you are giving me. You already are worthy. You saved us, Nathaniel, not just our lives, but our future. You gave us hope when we had none. Victoria kissed him again, then smiled against his lips. Besides, Nathan has already decided you are his. He calms faster in your arms than in mine sometimes. They spent the rest of the winter building their unexpected family. Nathaniel taught Victoria to shoot, insisting that anyone living in Montana territory needed to know how to defend themselves. Victoria taught Nathaniel to read better. He had only basic literacy, and they spent evenings with her reading aloud from the few books he owned while he carved toys for Nathan. As spring approached, practical matters needed to be addressed. Victoria's legal status, her claim to any property she and Thomas might have had, the logistics of making their relationship official. In April, when the snow finally melted enough to make travel possible, Nathaniel hitched up his wagon and they made the journey to Fort Benton. The settlement was shocked to see Victoria alive. She had been presumed dead, lost in the December blizzard along with her unborn child. The trading post operator who had last seen her was amazed, and the story of her survival and rescue spread quickly. There were some raised eyebrows at how quickly she had taken up with Nathaniel, but most people understood the practical realities of frontier life. A woman alone with an infant had few options, and Nathaniel was known as a decent, hard-working man. They were married by a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through, with Nathan in Victoria's arms throughout the brief ceremony. It was nothing like the wedding she had imagined as a girl. No fancy dress or elaborate celebration, but it felt more real and meaningful than her first marriage had. This was a commitment born of genuine love and respect, not just practical necessity. The newlyweds returned to Nathaniel's cabin, which was truly theirs now, and began planning for their future. Nathaniel had enough money saved, combined with what little Victoria had salvaged from her previous life, to purchase a good piece of land and some starter cattle. They found a beautiful section along the Musselshell River and filed their claim. Building their ranch was hard work that consumed the next several years. They started with a modest herd of 30 cattle and 2 horses, living in Nathaniel's cabin and working sunrise to sunset to build fences, a barn, and eventually a larger house. Victoria proved to be a natural ranch wife, tough and capable, handling a branding iron or a difficult cow as confidently as she handled domestic duties. Nathan grew into a strong, curious toddler, then an energetic boy, always following his father around the ranch, learning the work from the time he could walk. He called Nathaniel Papa, and never questioned that this tall, kind man was anything but his father. Nathaniel loved him fiercely, protective and patient, teaching him to ride, to rope, to raid the weather and the land. When Nathan was 3, Victoria became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy progressed under very different circumstances, with good food, a warm home, and a husband who doted on her. She gave birth to a healthy baby girl in their bedroom with a midwife in attendance and Nathaniel holding her hand throughout the labor. They named her Sarah Grace, and Nathan was fascinated by his tiny sister, insisting on helping with everything. 2 years later, another son joined the family, James Benjamin, and their house rang with the sounds of children playing. The ranch prospered as well, growing to a respectable 200 head of cattle. They hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, and Nathaniel gained a reputation as a fair employer and honest dealer. Through it all, the love between Nathaniel and Victoria only grew stronger. They had been forged together in crisis, tested by hardship, and they never forgot how lucky they were to have found each other. On cold winter nights, they would sit by the fire and remember that first night in the cave, how close they had come to never knowing this life of love and family. Nathan grew into a fine young man, graduating from the new school that had been established in the growing town of Roundup, about 10 miles from their ranch. He was 16 when Victoria finally told him the full story of his birth, about Thomas Thornton, who had given him life but never got to meet him, and about the blizzard, and how Nathaniel had saved them both. Nathan listened carefully, then hugged his mother tight. Thomas Thornton gave me life, but Nathaniel Vance gave me everything else. Papa is my father in every way that matters, but I am glad to know where I came from, and I will honor Thomas's memory. True to his word, Nathan later carved a headstone for Thomas, though they had no idea exactly where on the trail he had been buried, and placed it on a hill overlooking the ranch. It read, "Thomas Thornton died November 1883, father of Nathan. His dream lives on in his son." The years passed with the normal mixture of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge that makes up any life. They lost cattle in a harsh winter, but rebuilt the herd. Sarah grew into a beautiful, spirited young woman who wanted to be a teacher. James developed a gift with horses that rivaled his father's. The ranch became one of the most successful in the region, known for quality cattle and honest business practices. In 1905, when Nathan was 22, he married a lovely young woman named Emma from town, and Nathaniel and Victoria became grandparents the following year. Holding his grandson for the first time, Nathaniel was transported back to that terrifying, transformative night when he had first held Nathan against his chest, a tiny newborn fighting for life in the worst blizzard Montana had ever seen. "What are you thinking about?" Victoria asked softly, standing beside him and looking down at the sleeping baby in his arms. "I am thinking about how one decision to check a trap line in a blizzard changed my entire life. If I had stayed in my cave that day, if I had not trusted my instincts, I would never have found you. I would have missed all of this love and family and purpose. I would have lived my whole life alone and never even known what I was missing." Victoria took his free hand and squeezed it. "I think about that too, how close Nathan and I came to dying in the cold. How Thomas's death, as tragic as it was, led me to you. I love Thomas, but not like I love you. You are the great love of my life, Nathaniel Vance. You and these children and this life we have built together, this is everything I never dared to dream of when I was freezing under those rocks. Do you ever regret it? The hardship, the struggle, the way we came together?" Nathaniel asked, a question he had never quite dared to voice before. "Never. Not for one single moment. Every difficulty we have faced has been worth it because we faced it together. You are my home, Nathaniel. Not this ranch, not any building or place, but you. Wherever you are, that is home." They stood together in the warm summer evening, watching the sun set over the land they had claimed and tamed, surrounded by the family they had built. And Nathaniel felt a peace he had never imagined possible in his younger years. He had set out that snowy December day expecting to check some traps. Instead, he had found his entire future waiting for him under a rock overhang, bleeding and nearly dead, but fighting with everything she had to protect the child at her breast. The ranch continued to prosper over the following decades. Sarah did indeed become a teacher, opening a small school on the ranch property for the children of their workers and neighbors. James took over management of the horse breeding program and built it into a respected operation that supplied quality animals throughout Montana. Nathan eventually inherited the main ranch operations and proved to be as capable and fair-minded as his father. Nathaniel and Victoria grew old together, their hair turning silver, their hands growing gnarled from years of hard work, but their love never dimming. They celebrated their 30th anniversary in 1914, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and friends. The ranch hands surprised them with a celebration, and people came from towns all around to honor the couple who had become beloved figures in the community. As they danced together that night, Victoria whispered in Nathaniel's ear, "Do you remember teaching me to dance? I had 2 left feet, and you were so patient." "You still have 2 left feet," Nathaniel teased, then grunted when she stepped on his foot deliberately. They both laughed, the easy laughter of 2 people who knew each other completely and loved each other anyway. In 1918, the Spanish flu swept through Montana, and the family held their breath as the epidemic claimed lives throughout the state. By some miracle, the Vance family emerged unscathed, though several of their neighbors were not so lucky. They opened their home to orphaned children of 2 families who had been completely wiped out, and Victoria, now in her late 50s, found herself raising 3 more youngsters alongside her own grandchildren who often stayed at the ranch. "We seem to specialize in rescuing people," she told Nathaniel one evening as they watched the newest additions to their household play in the yard. "I only ever rescued 1 person," Nathaniel replied, "but she was the one that mattered most. You rescued Nathan too." "Nathan and you were a package deal. Saving him meant saving you meant saving him. I could not have done one without the other." Nathaniel pulled her close, still marveling at how perfectly she fit against his side even after decades of marriage. As the years continued to pass, they watched with pride as their descendants built their own lives and families. The ranch expanded to over 1,000 acres, supporting not just cattle but also wheat fields and orchards. The small cabin where they had spent that first winter together still stood, preserved as a reminder of where their family had truly begun, and grandchildren loved to hear the story of the blizzard rescue and the baby born in the snow. Nathaniel and Victoria made it a tradition to return to that cabin every December, on the anniversary of the day he found them. They would light a fire in the old hearth, sit together in the quiet, and remember how young and scared they had been, how uncertain their future had seemed, how impossible it would have appeared that they would build such a life together. "I would do it all again," Victoria said one such anniversary evening when they were both in their 70s. "Every moment of pain, every hour of fear in that blizzard if I knew it would lead me here to you." "I would walk through 1,000 blizzards to find you," Nathaniel replied, his voice still strong despite his age. "You were worth every risk, every hardship. Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life." They were still there in that cabin when their eldest grandson, Nathan Jr., found them the next morning, having ridden out to check on them. The young man stood in the doorway and smiled at the sight of his grandparents asleep in each other's arms by the fire, peaceful and content, exactly where they belonged. The ranch passed through the generations, each one adding their own touch while honoring the foundation that Nathaniel and Victoria had built. The story of their meeting became family legend, told and retold to every new generation. The town of Roundup grew into a proper city, and Montana Territory became the state of Montana. But through all the changes, the Vance Ranch remained a constant, a testament to what could be built from love and hard work. Nathaniel lived to the age of 84, still riding his favorite horse around the ranch property, until the day he had a heart attack and died peacefully in Victoria's arms, in the big bedroom of the house they had built together. He was surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, and his last words were to Victoria, "Thank you for the best life a man could ask for." Victoria followed him exactly 1 year later, on the anniversary of his death, as though she had been waiting for the right time to join him. She was 81 and had lived a life of purpose and love. At her funeral, which was attended by over 200 people, Nathan stood up to speak about his mother and the man who had saved them both. "My mother was the strongest person I ever knew," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She survived what should have been impossible, fought through pain and cold and fear to bring me into this world and keep me alive until help arrived. And my father, Nathaniel Vance, he was the kind of man who would walk into a blizzard on nothing more than an instinct that someone needed help. He saved us that day, but what he gave us was so much more than rescue. He gave us love, family, a home, a legacy. Everything good in my life stems from that moment when he found us under those rocks and decided we were worth saving." Nathan looked around at the packed church, at his siblings and their families, at the ranch hands and neighbors and friends who had all come to honor Victoria. This is what they built together. Not just a successful ranch or a big family, but a community of people who care for each other, who show up when times are hard, who understand that we are all connected. That is the legacy of Nathaniel and Victoria Vance, and it will live on through every one of us. They buried Victoria next to Nathaniel on the hill overlooking the ranch, with a view of the mountains where their story had begun. The headstone read, "Victoria and Nathaniel Vance, partners in life and love." She gave him purpose, he gave her hope. Together they built a legacy of family and love that will endure forever. And it did endure. The Vance Ranch continued for generations, weathering the Great Depression, the World Wars, the changing face of American agriculture. Each generation added their own chapter to the story, but they all knew where it had started, in a blizzard in December 1883, when a lone cowboy followed his instincts and found a dying woman and her newborn son clinging to life. The little cabin was eventually moved to the Montana Historical Society and preserved as an example of frontier life, but more importantly as the site where one of Montana's great love stories had blossomed. School children on field trips would hear the tale of Victoria's desperate survival and Nathaniel's rescue, of the baby born in a blizzard with no fire, of the cowboy who found them and warmed them both, saving not just their lives but giving them a future full of love and promise. In the end, that was the true measure of what Nathaniel and Victoria had built together. Not the acres or the cattle or even the children and grandchildren, though all of those mattered. What mattered most was the proof that even in the harshest circumstances, even when death seemed certain, love could bloom, hope could survive. Too lonely, hurting people could find each other and build something beautiful that would outlast them both. On cold December nights when the wind howled down from the mountains, The descendants of Nathaniel and Victoria would gather around their fires and tell the story again, keeping alive the memory of that terrible blizzard and the miraculous rescue that had started it all. They would talk about the strength it took for Victoria to keep fighting when giving up would have been so much easier, about the courage it took for Nathaniel to venture into a killing storm on nothing but instinct, about the love that had grown between them in that tiny cabin as winter raged outside. And in the telling and retelling, the story became more than just history. It became a reminder that life can change in an instant, that acting on compassion can alter the course of the future, that love found in hardship can be the strongest love of all. It became a story about the resilience of the human spirit, about the power of choosing hope over despair, about the unexpected ways that families are formed and futures are forged. The ranch itself became a symbol of all that was possible when people refused to give up, when they worked together, when they chose love over loneliness and connection over isolation. Visitors to Montana would sometimes stop by, having heard the story, wanting to see where it had all happened. The current generation of Vances, direct descendants of baby Nathan, welcomed them warmly, keeping alive the tradition of hospitality that Nathaniel and Victoria had established. The original cradle that Nathaniel had carved for Nathan still existed, passed down through the generations and used by every new baby born into the family. It was worn smooth by time and use, but still sturdy, still beautiful in its simple functionality. Holding their babies in that cradle, Vance's parents would think about that first baby, born in unthinkable conditions, kept alive by his mother's fierce determination, and a stranger's compassionate intervention. The story of Nathaniel and Victoria Vance was more than just a family history. It was a testament to the best of human nature, to the capacity for love and sacrifice, to the possibility of finding light in the darkest moments. It was a reminder that heroes are not always the people who perform grand gestures on bright stages, but often the ones who do what needs to be done in desperate moments, who reach out to help when it would be easier to turn away, who choose to love when they could choose to protect themselves from vulnerability. And so the legacy continued, generation after generation, each one adding their own stories of love and struggle, triumph and hardship, but all of them rooted in that foundational story of the blizzard and the rescue, of the woman who survived the impossible and the man who saved her, of the family they built from nothing but determination and love. It was a legacy that would have made both Nathaniel and Victoria proud, knowing that the risk they took on love, the family they created, the values they lived by, had echoed down through time, shaping lives and futures they would never see but whose existence was their most enduring gift to the world.